The crimson sky above Solace Prime burned with falling debris as another wave of biomechanical horrors descended from the darkness of space. Mira pressed her palm against the smooth crystal wall of the communication tower and felt the vibrations of explosions rippling through the structure. Her people were dying, and she was about to make a decision that would change everything. The Altarans had never known war. For 3,000 years, their civilization had grown in peace, creating wonders of art and science that made other species weep with their beauty. Their cities were living crystal that grew from songs. Their medicine could heal wounds by teaching. Cells to remember their perfect form and their greatest weapons were tools meant to calm aggressive minds and bring peace to conflicts. None of that mattered now. The Ravagers had come. Mira turned away from the window as another building collapsed in the distance, its musical death cry echoing across the city. The creatures attacking them were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. They were part machine, part beast, part nightmare. They consumed everything in their path, converting organic matter into more of themselves and turning technology into grotesque weapons that pulsed with veins and neural networks. "High Counselor," came a voice behind her. Tech specialist Kale stood at the massive communication array, his normally calm face streaked with tears and ash. "The deep space transmitter is ready. We can reach most of the known galaxy with this signal." "Have any of the other species responded to our previous calls?" Mira asked, though she already knew the answer. The Centauri Collective sent sympathies, but said their fleet is 3 months away. The hegemony of rings offered to negotiate with the Ravagers on our behalf. Kale's voice carried the bitter edge of someone who had learned that sympathy meant nothing when your world was burning. The others either cannot help or will not risk their own forces. Mira nodded slowly. The galaxy was full of civilizations that had grown soft in the long peace. Most had small defense forces meant for policing pirates and settling trade disputes. None had prepared for something like this, none except perhaps the species that most others preferred to ignore. "Expand the search parameters," she said quietly. "Include the rim worlds. Include everyone." Kale hesitated. "High Counselor, some of those civilizations are considered dangerous. There are species out there that other governments specifically avoid contact with." "Look around you." Mira gestured at the chaos visible through the crystal walls. "We are facing extinction. I would accept help from devils if they could save even one Altaran child." Her words were interrupted by a sound that made them both freeze. It was a howling that seemed to come from the very air itself, a noise that spoke of hunger and endless consumption. Through the transparent walls, they could see shapes moving through the streets below. The Ravagers had breached the inner city. "Send." "The message," Mira commanded. "Send it to everyone." Kale's hands moved over the crystal interface, and the tower began to hum with power. The message was simple because it had to be. Complex diplomatic language would waste precious time, and there was no time left for pride or careful politics. The signal that pulsed out into the darkness of space carried coordinates, tactical data about the Ravagers, and a desperate plea. "This is Solace Prime. We are under attack by an unknown hostile force. They are consuming our world and our people. We need immediate military assistance. We are not warriors. We cannot fight them. Please help us." As the transmission ended, Mira felt the building shake again. This time it was different. The vibration came from below, from the foundations themselves. The Ravagers were not just attacking the surface anymore. They were burrowing deep, converting the very ground beneath the city into part of their biomass. "How long until we get responses?" she asked. "If anyone responds at all, probably hours at minimum. Most civilizations will want to debate, form. Committees, send scouts first." Kale paused as screams echoed up from the streets. "High Counselor, we may not have hours." That was when the first response came. It was so fast that both Mira and Kale stared at the communication array in disbelief. The signal was strong, clear, and came from a sector of space that most civilized worlds marked as unexplored territory. "This is the Terran Defense Coalition responding to your distress call." The voice was strange, speaking their language with an accent none of them had heard before. "We are analyzing your tactical data now. What is your current military capability?" Mira looked at Kale, who shrugged helplessly. We have no military. We are a peaceful people. We have medical ships and research vessels, but no weapons." There was a pause that lasted long enough for another building to collapse in the distance. When the voice returned, it sounded different somehow. Harder. "Understood. We are dispatching immediate assistance. Prepare landing zones for heavy equipment and troop deployment. Clear all civilians from a 10-kilometer radius around your largest open space. Do not, repeat, do not attempt to engage the hostiles until we arrive." "How many ships are you sending?" Mira asked, hope beginning to bloom in her chest for the first time in days. "Adequate numbers. ETA 72 hours. Stay alive until then." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Mira and Kale alone with the sounds of their dying world. But something had changed. The despair that had been crushing Mira's spirit lifted slightly. Someone was coming. Someone who sounded like they actually knew how to fight. "Hi, Counselor," Kale said slowly, staring at his instruments. "I'm reading massive hyperspace disturbances from the direction of that signal. Whatever they're bringing, it's big." Mira pressed her hand against the crystal wall again, but this time she was not feeling vibrations of destruction. She was feeling something else, something that her peaceful people had never experienced before. It was the vibration of hope, backed by the promise of violence. 3 days later, when the human fleet emerged from hyperspace above Solus Prime, Mira understood why most of the galaxy preferred to leave humanity alone. What filled the sky was not a rescue mission. It was an armada built for total war, crewed by a species that had spent its entire existence learning how to kill efficiently. The Alterans had asked for help. They had received something far more dangerous than the monsters they faced. They had received the attention of Earth. Space above Solus Prime had never seen so many ships at once. The human fleet materialized from hyperspace in perfect formation, their vessels dark and angular, where Alteran ships were curved and bright. Admiral Kane watched the tactical displays from the bridge of the Retribution and felt the familiar weight of command settle on his shoulders. The planet below was a mess. What had once been a world of crystal spires and floating gardens was now pocked with craters and strange growths that pulsed with alien life. The Ravagers had been busy in the 3 days since the distress call, and Kane could see their bioships moving through the upper atmosphere like metallic insects feeding on a corpse. "Status report," he ordered, his voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the bridge. 12 dreadnoughts operational, 40 destroyers in formation, support vessels reporting ready, Commander Ross replied from her station. "Ground forces are standing by for immediate deployment. Colonel Rivers has 50,000 troops loaded and ready to drop." Kane nodded, studying the enemy formations. The Ravagers were unlike anything in the human combat databases. Their ships looked grown rather than built, with surfaces that rippled and moved like living skin. Weapons ports opened and closed like breathing holes, and some of the larger vessels appeared to be actively feeding on debris from destroyed Alteran ships. "Sir," Lieutenant Park called from the sensor station, "we're getting communication requests from the planet's surface. Multiple sources, all Alteran. They want to coordinate our approach with their remaining forces." "What remaining forces?" Kane asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Near as I can tell, sir, they have some medical ships and what they call peacekeeper vessels. No weapons signatures we can detect." Kane allowed himself a small smile. The galaxy was full of civilizations that had forgotten how to fight, but The Alterans had apparently never learned in the first place. That made this both easier and more complicated. Easier because he would not have to worry about friendly fire. More complicated because it meant the humans would be carrying the entire weight of this war. "Open a channel to Colonel Rivers," he ordered. The colonel's face appeared on the main screen, framed by the utilitarian interior of a troop transport. Behind him, Kane could see soldiers checking weapons and reviewing battle plans. These were not the polished Marines who stood guard at embassy functions. These were combat veterans pulled from the frontier wars, men and women who knew that the galaxy was full of things that wanted to kill humans. "Colonel, you've reviewed the tactical data on these Ravagers? What's your assessment?" Rivers' expression was grim. "They're biological, but they use technology in ways we've never seen. Our weapons should work on them, but we're going to need to adapt our tactics. The good news is they don't seem to understand human military doctrine. They're fighting like animals, not soldiers. Meaning they're about to learn why we're apex predators, sir." Kane felt the familiar cold satisfaction that came before battle. The Ravagers had made a mistake when they attacked a world that would call for human help. They were about to learn that there were worse things in the galaxy than biomechanical swarms. "Dr. Lin," Kane called to the science station. "What do we know about these creatures?" The xenobiologist looked up from her screens, her face bright with the excitement of discovery. "They're fascinating, Admiral. Part organic, part synthetic, but integrated in ways that suggest they've been evolving this combination for millennia. They reproduce by converting other biological matter, but they also seem to adapt technology into their biological systems." "Can we kill them?" "Oh, yes," Dr. Lin said with a smile that would have worried the Alterans. "They're biological. Everything biological can be killed if you know how. And I'm very good at learning how." The first engagement began when a group of Ravager scouts moved to investigate the human fleet. Kane watched as the alien bioships approached, in a loose formation that suggested they had never encountered organized military resistance before. "Weapons free," he ordered. What happened next lasted exactly 47 seconds. The human destroyers opened fire with kinetic weapons that accelerated, projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. The Ravager bioships, designed to absorb and adapt to energy weapons, had no defense against chunks of metal moving at relativistic speeds. The first volley completely destroyed 6 enemy vessels. The second volley, fired while the Ravagers were still trying to understand what had happened, eliminated the rest of the scout force. No human ship was even scratched. "That got their attention," Commander Ross observed, as new Ravager formations began rising from the planet's surface. Kane studied the enemy response. The bioships were moving faster now, and their formations suggested they were adapting to face a more serious threat. But they were still thinking like predators facing prey, not soldiers facing soldiers. "Deploy the nanobotic swarms," he ordered. This was technology that humanity had hoped never to use. Microscopic robots designed to dismantle enemy vessels at the molecular level, originally developed as a last resort against mechanical foes. Dr. Lin had spent the 3-day journey modifying them to work on biological targets. The nanobots were invisible until they reached the Ravager ships. Then the biovessels began to simply come apart, their living metal hulls dissolving like sugar in rain. The creatures inside died before they could understand what was happening to them. "Sir," Lieutenant Park reported, "we're getting panic communications from the planet's surface. The Altarans are asking if we're sure we're here to help them." Kane understood their confusion. What they were witnessing was not a rescue operation in any sense they would recognize. It was an extermination. But that was exactly what was needed. "Here, tell them to stay clear of our operational areas," he replied. "And prepare the second wave. Colonel Rivers, begin ground deployment. I want every Ravager on that planet dead within 72 hours. "Understood, sir. What are the rules of engagement?" Kane looked at the image of the dying world on his screen. at the crystal cities being consumed by alien hunger, at the peaceful people who had never learned to fight for their lives. "There are no rules, Colonel. These things eat entire civilizations. We are going to make them extinct." As the first human dropships launched toward the planet's surface, Admiral Kane reflected on the irony of the situation. The Alterans had called for help, and humanity had answered. But they had answered in the only way they knew how, with overwhelming violence designed to eliminate threats permanently. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when someone asked humanity to solve their problems. The first human boots touched Alteran soil just as dawn broke over the crystal city of Harmony Falls. Colonel Rivers stepped out of his dropship into air that smelled of ozone and decay, the scent of a world being slowly consumed by alien hunger. Around him, 50,000 human soldiers were deploying with mechanical precision into a war zone, unlike anything they had trained for. Rivers activated his tactical display and immediately understood why the Alterans had been losing so badly. The Ravagers were not fighting a war in any traditional sense. They were farming. The biomechanical creatures had turned entire city blocks into breeding grounds, converting Alteran architecture into massive organic structures that pulsed with new life. "Delta Team report," he spoke into his comm unit while his command staff established a perimeter around the landing zone. "We've got movement patterns consistent with hive behavior, sir," came the reply from Captain Walsh, leading the forward reconnaissance unit. "These things aren't just eating everything they find, they're transforming it. The whole city is becoming part of them." Rivers nodded grimly. He had read the tactical assessments during the drop, but seeing it firsthand was different. The Ravagers were not invaders in the classical sense. They were a plague that turned entire worlds into extensions of their collective organism. No wonder the Alterans had been helpless against them. "Sir," Sergeant Bell approached with a data pad, "we're getting interference with our standard communications. The biomass they've created is generating some kind of electromagnetic field." "Switch to quantum burst transmissions," Rivers ordered, "and deploy the sensor networks. I want to know the location of every Ravager on this continent before we begin active operations." What happened over the next 6 hours would be studied in military academies throughout human space for decades to come. While the Altarans watched from their shelters, human forces demonstrated why their species had become the dominant military power in their local region of space. The humans did not charge into battle. They mapped, they analyzed, they identified every Ravager nest, breeding ground, and feeding area within 100 kilometers of their landing site. They tracked movement patterns, cataloged different Ravager variants, and built a complete tactical picture of their enemy. Only then did they begin killing. The attack began with orbital bombardment from Admiral Kane's fleet. But these were not the crude bombardments that other species might use. The humans had spent hours calculating precise strike coordinates designed to destroy Ravager infrastructure while leaving Alteran survivors intact. Each shot was placed with surgical accuracy, turning biomechanical breeding complexes into craters while leaving adjacent buildings untouched. On the ground, human forces moved in coordinated units that the Ravagers could not understand. The biomechanical creatures had evolved to fight individual predators or unorganized prey. They had no concept of combined arms tactics, overlapping fields of fire, or strategic coordination. Captain Walsh led his special operations team into the deepest Ravager complexes, places where the alien organisms had converted entire city blocks into single living entities. His soldiers carried weapons that Dr. Lin had designed specifically for this mission. Biological warfare agents that targeted Ravager cellular structure. "Contact," Walsh reported as his team encountered their first active Ravager nest. Beginning. Sterilization procedures. What followed was not a battle. It was pest control on an industrial scale. The biological weapons spread through the Ravager biomass like fire through dry grass, causing the alien organisms to simply shut down and die. Within minutes, structures that had taken weeks to grow collapsed into inert organic matter. Meanwhile, regular human forces established kill zones throughout the city. When Ravagers moved to investigate the death of their nests, they found themselves facing weapons designed by a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of making other living things dead. The Ravagers adapted, as they always did. But human tactical doctrine adapted faster. When the biomechanical creatures began using acid attacks, human forces switched to ceramic armor. When the Ravagers started burrowing underground, the humans deployed seismic sensors and began collapse. Operations that buried entire Ravager colonies. "Sir," Lieutenant Smith reported to Colonel Rivers as the sun reached its peak, "we've eliminated approximately 60% of the Ravager biomass in our operational area. Casualty reports show minimal human losses." Rivers studied the tactical display, watching as Ravager positions disappeared one by one from the map. "What's the status of Alteran civilians?" "We've evacuated about 10,000 from the active combat zones. Most of them are asking when we're going to start negotiating with the Ravagers." Rivers almost smiled. The Alterans still did not understand what they were witnessing. This was not a battle between two equal forces. This was an apex predator species, demonstrating why it had earned that position through millions of years of evolutionary selection. The turning point came when the Ravager mother organism, a massive biomechanical entity that served as the coordination center for the entire planetary infestation, emerged from beneath the Crystal City. It was 3 kilometers long and pulsed with bioelectric energy that disrupted human electronics within a 2-kilometer radius. "All units, fall back to minimum safe distance," Rivers ordered, as the creature began converting the ground around it into extensions of its own body. "Request immediate orbital fire support." Admiral Kane's response came within seconds. "Fire support approved. Clear the target zone." What happened next would be remembered as one of the most precise displays of orbital bombardment in human military history. The Admiral's gunners placed a series of kinetic strikes that severed the creature from its root systems, then followed with plasma bombardment that sterilized the entire area. The mother organism died in less than 20 minutes. With its death, the coordination network that had controlled the entire Ravager infestation collapsed. Across the planet, biomechanical creatures began shutting down as their command structure dissolved. "All units begin cleanup operations," Rivers ordered. "I want every trace of Ravager biomass on this planet eliminated. Nothing gets to survive and reproduce." As human forces began the systematic extermination of the remaining Ravager organisms, High Counselor Mira approached Colonel Rivers under a flag of truce. The Alteran leader looked stunned, as if she had witnessed something beyond her ability to process. "Colonel," she said quietly, "your people have saved our world, but what you have done here, the efficiency, the coordination, the sheer scale of destruction. How do you fight with such precision?" Rivers looked at the Alteran leader, trying to find words that would explain human military philosophy to a species that had never known war. "High Counselor, your people asked for help against creatures that were consuming your civilization. We gave you exactly what you needed, the complete elimination of that threat." "But the way you fight," Mira insisted, "it's like you turn war itself into a science." "We do," Rivers replied simply. "We have to. Where we come from, everything wants to kill everything else. The species that survive are the ones that get very good at killing first." That evening, as human forces completed their sterilization of the planet, Admiral Kane received a priority transmission from Earth. The message was brief but significant. Sensors had detected multiple Ravager fleets moving through nearby star systems. This infestation of Solus Prime had not been an isolated incident. It had been a scouting mission. The War Council aboard the Retribution was unlike any meeting in recorded galactic history. Representatives from 17 different species sat around a holographic display showing the locations of Ravager fleets throughout known space. But it was the humans who dominated the room, not through politics or diplomacy, but through the simple weight of being the only species present who actually knew how to fight an interstellar war. Admiral Kane stood before the assembled delegates, his uniform bearing new decorations from the victory at Solace Prime. Behind him, the tactical display showed a galaxy painted red with Ravager infestation zones. Each red dot represented a world being consumed, a civilization crying for help, billions of lives hanging in the balance. "The situation is worse than we initially believed," Kane began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had just saved an entire planet. "Our intelligence teams have analyzed the Ravager bioships we captured, and the data confirms our worst fears. They're not just raiders. They're a galaxy-wide plague." High Counselor Mira leaned forward from her position at the table. Since the liberation of her world, she had become the unofficial spokesperson for the dozen peaceful civilizations seeking human protection. "How many worlds are we talking about, Admiral?" "Current count is 43 confirmed infestations, with at least 20 more worlds that have gone silent in the past month." Kane paused as murmurs of horror rippled through the assembled delegates. "At their current rate of expansion, they'll have consumed half the galaxy within 2 years. Ambassador Tell from the Hegemony of Rings, a species known for their diplomatic solutions to every problem, raised one of his forearms. Surely there must be some way to negotiate with them, to find a peaceful resolution to this conflict. Dr. Lin, who had spent weeks studying captured Ravager specimens, looked up from her datapad with the expression of someone who had seen too much. "Ambassador, with respect, you cannot negotiate with a cancer. These creatures don't have individual consciousness in any sense we understand. They're a collective organism driven by a single imperative: consume and reproduce. They're not evil or aggressive in any moral sense. They're just hungry, and everything that lives is food to them." The AE room fell silent as the implications sank in. These were civilizations that had built their entire political structures around the assumption that conflicts could be resolved through discussion and compromise. The idea of an enemy that could not be reasoned with was beyond their experience. "What do you propose?" asked Counselor Vega from the Centauri Collective. Kane activated a new display that showed human fleet dispositions throughout their space. The numbers were staggering. "The Terran Defense Coalition is mobilizing for total war. 300 ships of the line, 200,000 ground troops, and every weapon system we've developed in 5 centuries of conflict." "That seems like overkill for a police action," Ambassador Tell observed. "This isn't a police action," Kane replied coldly. "This is extermination. We're not going to contain the Ravagers or push them back to some distant corner of the galaxy. We're going to kill every single one of them." The delegates exchanged worried glances. Even the species that had specifically requested human intervention were beginning to understand that they had unleashed something beyond their control. "Admiral," High Counselor Mira said carefully, "your people have shown remarkable efficiency in dealing with these creatures. But surely the scale of what you're proposing is exactly what's necessary," Kane finished. "Counselor, your people survived because we acted decisively and with overwhelming force. The Ravagers are not going to stop expanding because we ask nicely. They're not going to retreat because we establish a strong defense. The only way to end this threat is to make sure it can never threaten anyone again." Over the following months, the galaxy watched in fascination and terror as humanity demonstrated what total war looked like when waged by a species that had made violence into an art form. The campaign began with General Park leading the Second Fleet to the industrial world of Beta Cygni, where Ravagers had been converting the native Corvan population into biomechanical hybrids. The liberation of Beta Cygni lasted exactly 18 hours. Human forces descended on the planet like a controlled apocalypse, using weapons that most civilizations had banned as too inhumane for warfare. When the last Ravager died, General Park made the decision that would define the rest of the Campaign. The planet was sterilized with fusion fire to ensure no trace of Ravager contamination could survive. "We don't take chances with a plague," Park reported to Admiral Kane. "Better a dead world than an infected galaxy." Meanwhile, Admiral Torres commanded the Third Fleet in deep strike operations against Ravager-breeding worlds. These were planets where the biomechanical swarms had been established for decades, creating massive hive complexes that stretched across continents. The human response was swift and absolute. Planet-killer weapons that humanity had hoped never to use were deployed without hesitation. The first planet to die was Kepler 442b, a former garden world that the Ravagers had converted into a single, massive organism. Admiral Torres's ships reduced it to molten rock in 3 hours of continuous bombardment. The second was a gas giant whose upper atmosphere had been transformed into floating breeding platforms. The humans simply ignited the entire atmosphere, creating a brief star that could be seen from neighboring systems. "Sir," Captain Foster reported from his stealth ship as he infiltrated the Ravager command system, "we've identified the location of 17 queen organisms. These appear to be the intelligent controllers for the entire collective." Kane studied the locations on his tactical display. The queens were spread across the galaxy, hidden in the deepest parts of Ravager-controlled space. Each one represented decades of accumulated knowledge and the ability to coordinate millions of drones across multiple star systems. "Begin Operation Silent Death," Kane ordered. "I want those queens eliminated simultaneously. If they're intelligent enough to coordinate this swarm, they're intelligent enough to adapt to our tactics if we give them time." What followed was the most complex military operation in human history. 17 special operations teams, each, led by officers trained in humanity's most classified warfare techniques, penetrated deep into Ravager space. Their mission was simple: find the queens and kill them without alerting the rest of the swarm. Captain Foster's team reached their target first, a massive biomechanical complex built around a captured space station in the Vega system. The queen organism had grown through the station's superstructure, turning it into a living command center that pulsed with bioelectric thought patterns. "Target acquired," Foster reported as his team prepared their specialized weapons. "Beginning elimination sequence." The assassination took less than 10 minutes, but its effects rippled across the galaxy instantly. As the Queen died, every Ravager under its control simply stopped functioning. Entire fleets of bioships went dark. Planetary infestations collapsed as their coordination networks shut down. Across the galaxy, 16 more teams carried out identical missions. Within 72 hours, the Ravager collective that had terrorized dozens of worlds for centuries was effectively decapitated. The remaining drones, driven only by basic survival instincts, were easily hunted down by human cleanup crews. The final battle of the war took place at the Ravager Prime breeding facility, a massive complex built around a dying star in the galactic core. Admiral Kane led the assault personally, commanding a fleet of humanity's most powerful warships in a direct assault on the heart of the swarm. The battle lasted 3 days. When it ended, the star system had been completely sterilized. Not a single Ravager organism survived, and the humans had demonstrated their willingness to fight in the most hostile environment imaginable to ensure total victory. As Admiral Kane's fleet emerged from the galactic core, they received a transmission from Earth. The message was brief: mission accomplished. Return home for victory parade. But Kane knew the real victory was not in the parades or celebrations waiting for them. It was in the silence that now filled the communication channels where Ravager distress calls had once echoed. It was in the peaceful sleep that billions of beings across the galaxy would enjoy, never knowing how close they had come to extinction. The galaxy was safe. The price of that safety was the knowledge that humanity could do this again if necessary. 1 year after the last Ravager Queen died in the fires of a collapsing star, The galaxy had learned to live with its new reality. The threat that had consumed worlds and terrorized civilizations for centuries was extinct, reduced to specimens, in human research laboratories and cautionary tales in alien history books. But the species that had achieved this victory remained, and their presence changed everything. High Counselor Mira stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, the new orbital facility that humans had built above Solace Prime. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see the reconstructed crystal cities of her homeworld gleaming in the light of their sun. The Ravager scars were gone, healed by Alteran biotechnology working alongside human engineering. Her people were alive, her civilization saved, her world restored. She should have been happy. Instead, she felt a weight in her chest that had nothing to do with the station's artificial gravity. "The memorial gardens are beautiful," Admiral Kane said as he joined her at the window. The human commander looked older than he had during the war, carrying the weight of decisions that had reshaped the galaxy. "Your people have a gift for making beauty from tragedy." "We learned that from necessity," Mira replied quietly. "When your world is constantly growing and changing, you must find ways to make even the painful transformations beautiful." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching human and Alteran ships move through the traffic patterns around the station. The integration had gone smoothly, perhaps too smoothly. The humans provided security and advanced military technology. The Alterans provided cultural exchange and biotechnological innovations. On the surface, it was a partnership between equals. But Mira knew better. She had seen the reports from other worlds, other species that had accepted human protection. The pattern was always the same: gratitude, cooperation, and the gradual realization that being saved by humanity came with permanent consequences. "Admiral," she said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll give me an honest answer." Kane turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "Of course, High Counselor. Are we free?" The question hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Kane was quiet for a long time, watching ships move through space in patterns dictated by human traffic control systems, following routes protected by human patrol fleets, carrying cargo inspected by human security forces. "You're alive," he said, finally. "Your people are alive. Your world is whole. Your civilization continues. That's what you asked for when you sent that distress call." "That's not what I asked." Kane sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. "Freedom is a complicated concept, High Counselor. Are you free to make decisions about your internal affairs? Yes. Are you free to trade with whoever you choose, travel wherever you want, live your lives as you see fit? Absolutely. Are you free to face the next existential threat to your species without human help? That's debatable." Mira had expected this answer, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a cold weight settling in her stomach. "The Galactic Protection Service. Yes. We've established permanent bases in 47 systems, with patrol fleets covering all major trade routes. Any species that wants our protection gets it, whether they ask for it or not." Kane's voice carried a note of regret that might have been genuine. The galaxy learned from the Ravager crisis. There are threats out there that peaceful civilizations cannot handle alone. And if a species decides they don't want human protection, that's their choice. We're not conquerors, High Counselor. We don't force anyone to accept our help. Kane paused, watching a human destroyer pass by the window. But we also don't ignore distress calls, and we don't let threats to galactic stability go unchallenged. Mira understood the unspoken message. Any species could refuse human protection, but doing so meant facing whatever dangers the galaxy contained without the most powerful military force in known space. It meant watching their neighbors enjoy security while accepting that the next crisis might find them alone and defenseless. "There's something else," she said. "The research. What Dr. Lin's teams have been doing with the Ravager specimens. Kane's expression hardened slightly. That research is classified. I'm not asking for details. I'm asking about implications. Your people didn't just defeat the Ravagers. You studied them. You learned how they worked, how they reproduced, how they thought. And now you're applying that knowledge. We're developing countermeasures against similar threats. Are you? Mira challenged. Because the reports I've seen suggest you're doing more than that. You're developing the ability to create similar threats. Kane was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the peaceful scene beyond the window. When he spoke, his voice was flat and professional. The galaxy is full of species that might develop along similar lines to the Ravagers: natural evolution, artificial enhancement, technological integration with biological systems. If we understand how such threats work, we can stop them before they become galaxy-ending problems. Or create them, Mira said softly. Yes, Kane admitted. Or create them. That's the price of being the species that others call when they need. Monsters killed. We have to become intimately familiar with how monsters work. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of General Rivers, now commander of all human ground forces in the sector. The veteran soldier looked as comfortable in the peaceful station as he had in the ruins of Solace Prime, which Mira found somehow unsettling. Admiral High Counselor? Rivers nodded to both of them. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got a situation developing in the Kepler sector. 3 species are in armed conflict over mineral rights, and 2 of them have requested our intervention. What's the 3rd species saying? Kane asked. They're refusing all outside mediation and have threatened to attack any human ships that enter their space. Rivers's expression suggested he found this more amusing than concerning. They call themselves the Talon Empire. Apparently, they're warrior species that believe conflict should be resolved through personal combat. Mira watched the exchange with growing unease. This was how it always started now. A local conflict, a request for human intervention, and then the gradual realization that humanity's idea of conflict resolution involved overwhelming force applied until resistance stopped. What's our response? Kane asked. Standard protocol. We've dispatched a diplomatic team backed by a battle group. If they want to fight, we'll accommodate them. If they want to talk, we'll listen. Either way, the conflict gets resolved and civilian casualties get minimized. And if they choose to fight? Rivers shrugged. Then they learn the same lesson everyone else has learned. We're very good at war, and we don't do things halfway. After Rivers left to coordinate the response, Mira and Kane returned to their contemplation of the space beyond the window. But the peaceful scene no longer seemed as comforting to Mira. Every ship, every station, every trade route existed now within a framework of human power. Admiral, she said, do you ever regret answering our call for help? Kane considered the question seriously. Regret saving your people? Never. Regret the position it put us in? Sometimes. He turned to face her directly. High Counselor, humanity didn't want to become the galaxy's police force. We were perfectly happy staying in our own corner of space, solving our own problems. But when you sent that distress call, when we saw what the Ravagers were capable of, we realized that isolation wasn't an option anymore. So you took responsibility for all of us. We took responsibility for making sure the Ravager crisis never happens again, for making sure that no species has to face extinction because they happened to be peaceful when something hungry found them. Kane's voice carried a weight of conviction that Mira found both reassuring and terrifying. That's what the Galactic Protection Service is really about. We're not trying to rule the galaxy. We're trying to make sure it remains a place where civilizations like yours can exist, even if those civilizations have no choice in the matter. Freedom is meaningless if you're dead, Kane replied bluntly. Ask the species the Ravagers consumed whether they would have preferred to remain free and extinct or accept protection and survive. That evening, Mira attended a cultural exchange event in the station's main auditorium. Altaran musicians performed alongside human artists, creating new forms of beauty that neither species could have achieved alone. Children from both civilizations played together in carefully designed gardens that combined crystal growth techniques with human engineering. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was everything the diplomatic protocols said it should be. But as Mira watched Admiral Kane accept the gratitude of Altaran families whose children were alive because of human intervention, she noticed something else. The human soldiers who provided discreet security never relaxed their vigilance. The human technicians who maintained the station's systems had access to every communication, every data transfer, every private conversation that occurred within their protective sphere. The humans were not malevolent rulers. They were not conquerors, in any traditional sense. But they were always present, always watching, always ready to make the hard decisions that peaceful species could not make for themselves. A week later, news arrived that the Talon Empire had chosen to fight rather than accept human mediation. The conflict lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Talon Empire no longer existed as an independent entity, though its people were alive and under human protection. The mineral rights dispute that had triggered the crisis was resolved through human arbitration, with fair compensation for all parties. They chose poorly, General Rivers reported to Admiral Kane. But their military technology was impressive. Dr. Lin's teams are analyzing their weapons systems and tactical doctrine. Might be useful against future threats. Mira realized then that this was how the galaxy would continue to evolve. Each crisis would bring more species under human protection. Each conflict would teach humanity new ways to fight future wars. Each victory would demonstrate to potential enemies that resistance was futile and cooperation was survival. The Ravagers had been defeated, but their legacy lived on in the galaxy-spanning military infrastructure that their threat had justified. Humanity had become what the galaxy needed them to become, the apex predator that kept all the other predators in check. As she stood on the observation deck, watching human patrol ships maintain their eternal vigilance over trade routes that would never again know the fear of Ravager raids, Mira finally understood the true price of salvation. They were all safe, now. They were all protected. They were all free to live their lives in peace and prosperity, under the watchful eyes of the species that had saved them, and none of them would ever again face the universe alone.